Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Tales and Tactics Beyond the Book. This is our show that breaks down the fundamental concepts behind tabletop games and how we play them. I'm your host, Troy. Joining me is my co-host, Max, the other guy. And working behind the scenes is our producer, Jay. Today's episode is about new Editionitis, that ever-chasing, all-consuming race to get to the next edition. Why is that a case? What does it mean for us as the people who play these games? And does it mean anything good? Is it always a bad thing? What can we take away from when our favorite game gets a new edition?
So obviously anybody who's been in either hobby, wargaming or role-playing, or even board games, has probably experienced this to some degree. I think the board game people get let off a little easy because most of the time the rules aren't drastically changed or the game is not entirely reinvented, but in war games and role-playing games that does happen.
There are some very prominent examples of a game being like wholesale renovated and it being either a complete failure, like just fall on their face failure, or rarely a sleeper success hit that kind of takes the original audience a little bit by surprise, but cements itself as a much stronger evolution over time. So I don't know. It is a case-by-case scenario, I always say.
In your summation, do you think that like there's a typical trend to what works? Like, I don't want to say that everything that's totally left field of whatever the established version is always a failure. It does seem that way, though. And it seems that seems like the ones that are like true to form, the ones that refine the form of whatever it is, get a better rap. I almost want to say that in a lot of these cases, it's sometimes a new Coke, classic Coke situation.
100%.
Right. So like two immediate examples come to mind, which is 3rd edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons.
And they were relatively close to each other in time as well. So it's kind of funny that these two like seminal RPG franchises both had sort of the same thing happen, where the developers or the producers or whatever decided to change the game as if there was a new audience that were to exist now. You know, like, oh, I've made a new game, so therefore there's a new audience for it. And it's like, well, what about that? What about the audience that you had that we knew existed? And it's like, oh, either they'll change or forget about us, but this new audience that I've invented in my mind's eye, they'll buy the game. And I feel like that happened twice in a row.
Yeah, or parallel. I mean, I don't doubt that, and maybe somebody listening can think of other examples around that time where that also happened.
I'll go so far as to say that Warhammer 3rd Edition Fantasy Roleplay by Fantasy Flight Games is a very fun game for what it is. It's not the evolution of the role-playing game that it took the title of, by no means, right? It's like this really weird junction. When you look at fantasy roleplay 1st, 2nd, and 4th, there's this line, right? This causality between them. But when you look at 3rd, it's like, what happened? This is completely out of nowhere. And that kind of is something you were just speaking to here. When there is a new edition that's made, what is it that is a more successful way to approach it from a foundational level? Is it reform or is it revolution?
Yeah, it's always a tricky one to kind of figure out because there have been other times where this has been tried. If you look into any of the myriad versions of Traveller.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, in fact, my subject for next week. And I'll only be talking about one of those. But there have been those things where they've essentially either redefine the rules, refashion the setting, or both. And it never quite took off because it was too much of a separation for the existing audience, and it didn't appeal enough to a new audience. Because sometimes looking back at some of those odd editions of Traveller, I'm trying to remember the name. It's not Mega Traveller. It's one of them that I think pulls the timeline forward. I think it might be Era. I'd have to look it up again. In any case, some people go back and look at it now and be like, oh, wow, that was like a lot more of a hard sci-fi style setting. But people seem to more generally be used to the space opera style of classic. In that case, it was more of a content And there were some rule changes. And I don't know if those rule changes were better or worse. I know in one edition of the game, they tried to merge Twilight 2000 into, like, use a more unified rule system that had been based on Twilight 2000's rules. But, like, jumping back to things like D&D 4th edition, there's a few reasons why they wanted to make a 4th edition after 3rd. 3rd was obviously, like, as far as editions of D&D, we could argue its merits as a system, but it was kind of a runaway success, especially with things like the OGL and the ecosystem that created.
D20 Modern, etc., right?
Yeah, well, like the entire D20 license system and the ability for, like, third-party publishers to produce whatever content they wanted. It's weird because at the time, that was the system of D&D that I had played the most of. I was familiar with 2nd and I had played it. And I thought that was cool. It had its own vibe. But 3rd was the one that most of my friends played. It's the one that I played the most. It's the one that I'm still mostly familiar with. And looking back at that point now, I can see that it really did hit the end of its life cycle. The game, with all of its supplements and third-party stuff, it could do everything, but it was feeling a little bloated and tired.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was the only reason. I know that obviously with 4th edition, they tried to revise the OGL. There was a financial incentive, or at least a license control incentive that they were trying to put across as well. I remember being pretty hyped for 4th. You know, that's you and I were in school together at the time.
I was too, yeah. I remember wanting those core books, and I think we both got a set.
Yeah, and I remember, like, you know, following the forums and it being, you're waiting for updates, and, like, when they had that little sample thing came out and they were going to explain all of, like, the classes and races and the little tweaks and adjustments, I was 100% on board, to the point that when it actually came out, I went down to my local store. I bought all 3 books right away, and that is the last time I've ever done that. I remember taking it actually to your place, and we all played it, and it was really slow and mechanical. It over-explained things and didn't leave enough ability to figure things out on your own based on how it was written.
Yes.
I could kind of see how you could get it to work, like by unraveling it, but it was such a locked-in style of rule design, as opposed to the basic bonuses of 3rd edition, which are actually pretty much identical in 5th. They're just streamlined with a lot less clutter, because 3rd edition was much more of a skills system.
Yeah.
Which obviously those had become a lot more popular, you know, preceding any edition of D&D. Skills kind of existed in the end of 2nd edition with kits, but once they had reformed it, there was this urge to put that in there because of every other system that was doing it. So, like, you know, everything from Cyberpunk to Call of Cthulhu to, like, most skill-based systems. And I guess it was the idea of modularity in character development, but it made the game feel different. And then 4th edition really simplified that and made the combat super complex, not in an unintuitive way, but in, like, a deeply prescriptive way. Like, I don't want to dig too much into how, because I should just do a 4th edition episode. But, like, there were things like, instead of, like, oh, I use, like, this ability and it, like, throws you, like, 30 feet back, and so in your mind's eye you can see that had then been reinterpreted to, you do this much damage and move them 1 square back. So it was very much being played on a grid. It felt more like a board game, which weirdly enough is similar to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd edition, which also felt more like a board game. There's something about board games in, like, the early 2000s that, I don't know, captivated designers for some reason.
The big change in 4th and in 3rd seemed to be, like, painting the lines on the ground. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yeah,
in our game of hopscotch, it's like, we're going to paint the lines on the ground, and this is how we now know how it works. We all know. Like, in 3rd edition fantasy roleplay, you would have a deck of cards. Either your game master would play a card, or you could even shuffle and draw. So when you would reach a location, say there was going to be a roadside encounter, you would take out the roadside card that had a context modifier that applied to this environ. And it was like, roadside encounter. Cavalry gets a movement modifier because they're on roads. But, oh, it's been raining, so it's muddy. So if you get a double negative on your die result, you slip.
Right.
And it had like a prescribed condition that applied to that environment. And there's a lot of interest in kind of like, it's really cool in a certain way, but that probably only works once or twice.
Yeah. I don't want to say that it was like trying to reduce it down to something, but I do remember that it felt a lot more like playing Hero Quest than playing a sort of role-playing mind's eye theater thing. And it's funny, too, because prior to getting that edition of D&D, I had actually been playing a lot of White Wolf games.
Oh, yes, right.
So I had been playing a lot of Vampire and Mage, and those games are very loose and fluid. I was even playing Fate a bit, too, or Fudge, whichever version of it.
I had come from second edition fantasy roleplay personally.
Oh, yeah. So I was talking about fourth edition D&D.
Oh, yeah, right.
But for fantasy roleplay, yeah. So there was like, yeah, if you were coming from second edition, that's much more of an sort of a refined old school version of a role-playing game.
Yeah.
It more resembles a game from the 80s, but a little bit lighter. Like
yes.
It's not quite as, it's no Twilight 2000 or like, like some kind of mill sim role-playing game.
Yeah, where you're counting the rounds in the magazine. Exactly.
It's funny because, like, when we were doing our review of Warhammer Fantasy 4th Edition role-playing, they've actually added a lot more crunch back into it. Not in an unpleasant way, actually, at least for my taste. But it's interesting how the crunch to interpretive factor kind of like phases. Another example, to go to another product that we reviewed, was, and I think this is a more successful one, also Fantasy Flight, was Legend of the Five Rings 4th edition, which was a big departure. And it's funny because it uses a lot of the same mechanics as Warhammer Fantasy, but for some reason it works in that setting based on the narrow scope of the characters you're playing. I mean, you can broaden it out, obviously. They explain how to do that, but ideally you're playing characters that work within a very rigid social cast, and it feels more expressive, like even having the different stats as like elemental types, like instead of being strength or dexterity. And it's much more interpretive. And so I feel like because they bought all the way in on that, rather than Warhammer Fantasy 3rd feeling a lot more like a board game, L5R 4th doesn't feel like a board game at all.
Oh, that's the thing that really strikes me is once you take away a lot of the artifice of the 3rd edition roleplay, but you keep the dice, you end up with like L5R. You end up with Edge of Empire, two very good RPGs. It's just, I don't know how to say this without kind of like going there, but like you never go full board game,
Yeah. I mean, and you also probably should never go full storytelling game either.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting point, actually.
I think there's an upper limit to that as well.
Because you need, like, this is a perspective. So when I say need, I'm talking from my point of view. But I do feel the need for mechanical friction, like for there to be like teeth biting into the game that you have to navigate around, as opposed to you just being able to like fold whatever situation you want together. Like I like there being like something that you must navigate, whether it be the dice rolls or a resource pool or something, but there has to be a something. Otherwise, the exercise kind of doesn't necessarily, but has the risk of being hollow, meaningless. Other things that are more derisive sometimes. But I mean to say, like, I guess from our prior episodes, like friction in gaming is a huge reason why we enjoy storytelling in gaming, because that's the moments of drama and tension, right? And you need those mechanics to provoke that, I guess.
Well, I think it really comes down to asking the question, like, why are the mechanics there at all? Because there's, obviously there are these philosophies. And it's funny because I see this as sort of some parts of this to be a bit resurgent. Like, I don't want to downplay any of his content necessarily, because I actually I even respect his point of view, his philosophy, I think comes from, but what is it? Professor Dungeon Master? Forgotten what his YouTube channel is. I'll actually look that up. He makes the clear point that it's like, oh, well, you can reduce all of the, and he's talking about D&D primarily, is that you can reduce all of the math down to like a roll between like 14 and 16, and the modifiers don't change. And that speaks to some of the bloat in the game. And it's one reason why I'm not a big fan of progression-based role-playing games, because I find them to be a bit... I actually feel you also get this from like Bethesda games.
Oh.
Oddly enough. So like they have a mechanic so that the creatures level up with you so that they're always hard, but then you never feel like you're being overly challenged or under challenged by anything.
Yeah.
But then it makes everything feel really samey. And I think that's just a general, I don't know if I can call it a flaw of D&D, but it was funny that Professor Dungeon Master kind of pointed that out. He has a video explaining exactly that. My criticism of that is like, well, that's not all of what the rules entail. And I don't think he would argue that either. I never got the sense of that. But like, why are the rules there at all? Well, some people would say that it's to create a sense of fairness so that people can't just dictate whatever they want. But there are entire types of role-playing games or games that revolve around just like fate is essentially just here's a milieu and some dice that kind of give you a result.
Yeah.
But you're more or less just kind of winging it. Like Savage World's a little crunchier than that, but pretty close as well. And it's kind of like, let's all just make it up. And I think that seems fun for a while, but then I find I want more structure to the artifice because I don't want to feel like anyone is particularly in control.
Mm-hmm. It should feel a bit like it's got its own identity or life.
Yeah, I like it when the system feels like a third player. Or, well, I mean, there's obviously more than 3 people playing, but a third kind of player.
Yeah, third heat coming in. I get you.
Yeah, and the nice thing about that is the choices that the GM makes can entertain the players, and the players can make choices that entertain the GM, but the system can make choices that surprise everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of random tables.
Yeah, agreed.
It's unselective information, right? Like it's things you didn't think of that are within the possibility of the milieu, right? Like, or they're not, if depending on how crazy you want to get with it. But like if you have, 1,000 fantasy items and you want to roll on what that is. I remember there was a really good 3rd edition D&D book that had tables for a dragon's horde.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was just really useful to be like, hey, you want to get some cool, like, and I just use it for every encounter where it's like, you found a treasure and like, maybe there's something really cool. I remember 2nd edition also had a lot of really cool tables for like random things. Going back more or less to the edition idea, like I can think of another example where the paradigm shift, though different, was also sort of like not quite taken up. And that is White Wolf.
Oh, that's another good one.
So they have World of Darkness, which was like the line that they had for like so many editions. And then they had Chronicle of Darkness, which the best way I can describe it is they filed off all of the weird corners from all of their games and made them intercompatible with each other, which sounds cool on paper, but then it made every one of those games feel really dull.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you couldn't tell cool stories, and some of the reimagining of the lore was interesting, but I remember generally it wasn't like, oh, I hate this, but it was kind of amongst the White Wolf fandom was sort of met with a meh.
That reminds me of how Marvel Ultimate went over, right?
Yeah, it's like, oh, another crazy event. Maybe this will be cool.
Oh, Peter Parker works at a website now. Oh, okay, great.
Okay, neat. You're updating things to be modern, but also like it almost takes away any of the character. It has to do with that whole thing where it's so weird that White Wolf did that in my mind because their games are not that hard to understand. Some of the narrative concepts are a little hard to grasp, or they're just so deep that you're like, man, I could just read this book and that would be like my entire weekend. I could just read about the origins of the Masquerade and I'd never need to play the game ever. But Yeah, it was weird because it's like a pool-based D10 system, and they made it still a pool-based D10 system, but they like cut the skills. No, they didn't cut the skills. Well, they kind of cut the skills down, but they created more of like unified categories, whereas like between different games, it wasn't just a matter that like werewolves had slightly different skills than mages on their character sheet, but like even the way they categorized those skills were a little different. I didn't find it that hard to make them cross-compatible. And very often, you wouldn't really... It was thematically weird to have a game where you had, like, werewolf players and vampire players and mage players and, I don't know, like, changeling fae players or whatever other crazy additions they'd come up with. Geists.
Right.
Yeah, I think maybe more of the impetus behind that was to just make those feel more like a cohesive ecosystem, but they just sawed everything off, and then it just felt really dull, and it was weird to describe. And the other thing that you have to be careful when you're measuring up to whatever an edition is like, is this because it's different and I'm not used to it, or is it because what they've changed is actually not as interesting? Because toward the end of its life cycle, there were parts of Chronicles of Darkness that I really liked, which I mentioned in the Mage episode, like Slayer. Chronicle of Darkness's version of Slayer, and its associated products, I've forgotten the name of it, the one where you can play serial killers, essentially. And I never quite got my head around how that game was actually supposed to work, like, in play. But, like, those were written and designed really well. But I think it's because they had, through this reinterpretive system toward the end of it, they kind of like figured out what worked and what didn't. And they had made it feel robust and also rich with lore and all these other things. But then it just goes to show, because then they released Vampire 20, Werewolf 20, Mage 20, which are the 20th anniversary editions of those games. And they're literally just like the most beautiful compendium version of like that whole system rolled into one giant book.
That's so cool.
Yeah, they've tweaked and edited things to kind of get them up to date, add a little more GM advice, and worked out some anachronisms that they may have had in earlier editions. And people love those. Like, even new people are like, oh, yeah, that's... And I think it's probably because old school players are probably recommending those over things like Chronicle. Can you think of it like a new edition of a game that just like, it didn't have to be like the edition before it, but it just blew the whole thing out of the water? I mean, it could be a war game for all I know.
The one that I come back to, and part of this is retrospect, so we have to keep that in mind. But I think when Warhammer 40K 3rd edition came out, that was like the recipe clicked.
Right.
You know, like we had like, there was, 2nd edition was about small warbands, right? But the push for fielding bigger armies was always there, and people were always trying to field bigger armies than 2nd edition reasonably supported. So 3rd edition, with its re-emphasis, with its like secretly becoming a company-level World War II game in space with grimdark Gothic stuff, like that all of a sudden was this like format that allowed the game and the character of that game to shine. And then the support that edition got. Like, not only did we get a codex for everybody, we got multiple codexes for the same faction, like updating them, renovating their powers for even the same edition, the same core game engine. But this was, in my opinion, such a strong era. There were like a lot of the core identities of the game were present. I mean, like Gene Stealer cults, where were they? But I mean, whatever. We are mostly talking about like the core identity of the game. And it was so pronounced. It was like, it was running thick. And unfortunately, the speed of new editions picked up and up and up. And now we're on the 3-edition cycle, the 3-year edition cycle. And it's like, my big thing is I was a Horse Heresy player, and you're going to notice was because I can't do it again. Like, I can't do all these books again. Like, another whack load of hardcover books. Like, one, that's a lot of money in junk. But two, like, where are they going in my house? Where is this infinite well of storage that I can put all the new additions and all this new junk I'm supposed to get every 3 years. And is the alternative that I'm landfilling this other stuff? Because that doesn't feel right. That one, because that doesn't feel right. And two, because these are supposed to be like quality works that I'm interested in and we're invested in. To just chuck them after what, only 3 years, just feels like this burnout cycle that, I don't know, kind of left me behind. And it's too bad because like I like the Horse Heresy and I like a lot of Games Workshop imagery and stuff. It's cool. Their stories are a little bonehead sometimes, but like there's cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that subscription style keep pace with this as we just continually change it. For what? I mean, like, you look at the new Horse Heresy edition, we've yet to see it come out. The Saturnine new set is on pre-order, sure. And they're like bringing words like cool back and willpower back, like stats from Rogue Trader, and stats you see in Necromunda. And it's like, oh, that's fun. That's neat you're doing that. But effectively, you're just going back to the same bits of parts that you're going to add on for 2 editions and then remove now and be like, oh, it's so much more playable now because we took that shit off. Oh, we put it back on. Look how much more deep the game is now. And it almost feels like how a sports game gets made. Like when a new console comes out, the sports game gets brought back to 0 in terms of feature depth and is released as like basically, hey, tackle each other in NFL. That's all we have. And then as successive years come out, they load stuff back up. And it's like very much the same thing in the wargaming sphere, where they'll build something up and tear it down and build it back up again using the same parts, even so far as the same names, and selling it back to you on nostalgia. Like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to have that skill again? Like RPGs do this too, right? With like the skills and builds and abilities. And you may be like, oh, look at this new 5th edition character. It's just named after a 2nd edition character class. Isn't that cool to you? And it's like, yes, it is cool to me. I want this. And it's like, that to me is the problem with new editions. Like Warhammer 6th edition, smashed it out of the park. That is a great edition. 3rd edition, smashed out of the park for 40K. That is an excellent edition. We just talked about Chain of Command 2nd edition. That is probably the cleanest, best 2nd edition that comes to immediate mind in the wargaming sphere. But another one is LaSalle, because that's an example of taking a Napoleonic war game and fundamentally changing the hell out of the turn order, but in doing so, making it much more dynamic and much more like challenging to best your opponent, not to play and like, oh, this is hard now, but to wrest control of the initiative of the situation to get the most favorable outcome is actually like a skill now. And I love that. And that was different in the 1st edition. So that's another example of of taking one direction and moving to another, but still being spiritually the same thing. Like it's a divisional Napoleonic game, but now it plays different, but it's better at being that essence that they both essentially still were.
Yeah. I can think of actually, that reminds me. So I can in role-playing, I think I can think of one example, and there's probably other ones, but I think what you just said kind of tied into why this might be the case. One example of a system where every edition has felt more or less tight. Arguably, the innovations are small. It's more of a matter of refinement, and that is essentially everything made by Chaosium. So Call of Cthulhu has... I think the way they've handled editions has been really smart. I actually think we're at 7th edition, right?
I think so, yeah.
The current edition, feel free to correct me, is a very nice refinement that has taken certain repeated case situations from other later editions and folded them into the game as a matter of need, like chase rules. The first time I had ever seen chase rules, I'm sure they existed somewhere before this, but the first time I saw them was in Call of Cthulhu. And I thought it made a lot of sense, like especially for that game. Now I can't think of, like, if you have a horror game and you don't have chase rules, I mean, I guess you could figure it out, but it's just nice to have a system. And as much as that system seems weird, it does work. And there's so many other things, like, for instance, we're not going to make a whole new edition of the game that plays differently. We're going to release this module called Pulp that changes how your characters work and how you handle action to make it more of an adventure game with horror elements than a horror game that has an adventure tied into it. It's hard to call Call of Cthulhu scenarios adventures.
I know. They're more like a series of happenings that are bad.
Yeah, that you sort of work to figure out what's going on to the point where hopefully you can stop it, but you probably won't survive.
That's my favorite outcome, is you as a character are lost in some fatal way, whether it be actual death or, madness or something, but you do manage to stop the summoning or the artifact being recovered or whatever. I think that is that's why I think horror games are one-shot machines. That's another topic altogether, but I do think that's when they're at their prime, so to speak. Like,
I mean, the only thing I'll say about that is if they're not one shots, they definitely work better if they're self-contained. Like, otherwise, you really are playing an adventure game.
One that's just super lethal.
Yeah, like a really lethal historic adventure game. But just to go back to how Chaosium handles the idea of adding new ideas to the game. So like the current edition has its core game, which is essentially just a really refined and streamlined, modernized, but not overly modernized version of 6th edition, which is the one I like playing, and 5th. One advantage this has is that it's backwards compatible, more or less. If you have the patience to dig through some of those earlier editions of scenarios, you don't have to wait for them to rewrite it. You just dig that up, adjust a little bit of math, and with Call of Cthulhu, hardly any. It's not like doing conversions with like between Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd and 4th,
right,
where like characters have totally different core stats, and you have to then figure out like, oh, how much agility and dexterity do I transfer from this character that only has agility?
It just goes to show that 4th is another example of, I think, a good edition, because I often forget that those stats weren't present in 2nd edition. They just feel natural in their inclusion. It doesn't feel like, oh, what? There's agility now? There's dexterity now? Like it's like, no. It actually makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know that I mentioned in the episode where we covered that, but I can't live without the split in agility and dexterity, which for those listening is there is a distinctive difference in the kinds of skills that are fine motor skills and mobility skills.
For sure.
Someone who's good at picking a lock is not necessarily great at like jumping across rooftops. They might be.
Yeah, it's true. That could be the same person, but not for the same reason. It's the same person.
Yeah. These could be couched in the same character concept, but they don't sound like they rely on the same core ability.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole other thing. I mean, we did talk about ability scores a long time ago, but like that was one of those ones where I'm like, oh man, that makes so much sense.
100%.
Dexterity as a singular stat? What? Then it brings into the question, well, like, how many stats do you need? Maybe you do it like Cypher or Numenera, where it's just 3, right? And then they cover wider, like it's a level of abstraction. My preference for having nimbleness divided into 2 kinds is something that's very preferential to how I conceive of those things working. And it just sits well with me. But like other people, they may not care, or they might be trying to play like a more sort of bold and expressive style of role-playing game, in which case, yeah, like why not just narrow it down to like even fewer stats? I'm not saying that 6 isn't sitting in some kind of sweet spot, because obviously it's popular, but it might just be a matter of habit.
Oh, and that's a big part of edition change, is like how much of resistance to edition change is just our own habitual nature, where there could be good reasons to change an edition, like fundamental things that were not balanced out right. Like one of the things that was unfortunate about 4th edition was HP was wrong. To my understanding, was the way HP was presented in the original monster manual was later edited to have less HP for your mobs, for your monsters, to allow for much more expedient combats. And that's how the designers saw the game working. But that's not at all how we experienced it playing it, just like we related about our getting our books, coming over to my place, playing it, and being like, what was this?
The one combat we did ate up the entire evening. And we started pretty early, right? Like, and we had already gone through and made characters. And I thought the character building process, though, like not too dissimilar from other editions. was pretty smooth. Like, obviously, they had these neatly packed abilities and you selected them. And it felt more like building a character in like a CRPG.
Yeah, it did.
I know a lot of people make the correlation between 4th edition and World of Warcraft. And I'm sure there's some influence there because obviously that was something that it's so funny. I remember hearing Matt Colville talk about this. It's really funny. So he was lamenting World of Warcraft because it ate up all of the people who played in his regular games.
Right.
For like D&D and stuff like that. And I totally get that. But nobody, I knew one person that played World of Warcraft. So in my mind, it didn't affect me at all. Nobody I knew really played that game. Or if they did, they didn't play it so addictively that they couldn't take time out to play something else. They were not of an obsessive nature. But I also was running public games at a store. And if you pardon my language, World of Warcraft cut down the asshole count when I was running my games, because the people that just wanted to be murder hobos now had an outlet. If anything, I was overwhelmed at the number of people that wanted deep role-playing. Now, that's just my own personal experience.
No, but that's really interesting, though.
And it's not as though I never had, someone that was murder hoboing one of my games or worst case, like Old Man Henderson my game. Because when you run a public game and, I had to learn as I went. If you don't entertain teenagers, they will turn on you. If you make them bored, God help you.
Yeah.
They don't even know what they're doing. They're just going to do it.
That's funny.
But anyway, by and large, WoW made my life easier. Because I'm like, oh, well, let's filter all of those people out. Cool.
With Final Fantasy Online, it was similar. Like, that was the game that like took the player archetype who was like, I'm going to spend 7 hours working on my character sheet. I'll see you later. Like, it was almost like it's funny that like when role playing is not the thing you're there to do, you're there to do some of the other aspects of the hobby, like the character sheets or like the door kicking, some of these things. Like, that's what your thrill is. It's sometimes nice when these video games come along and are just like, hey, where's that button? And you just come over here and press that button repeatedly.
Yeah, and then either they get it out of their system through that, or they just don't bother with that aspect of what you're doing, and then you only are left with the people that actually are wanting to engage with the aspects that you are.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know that there's a lot of a point to be made about that, because I think that's a very individual thing. As, obviously, from the example of Colville, like, obviously he had a harder time putting together a group. So it negatively affected somebody. But one other aspect of editions and this is a present concern of mine, and it actually ties back to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, is, now, don't get me wrong, I really like Cubicle 7 and their output. I like the quality of their work. I like their writing. Sometimes they take a bit of a distant approach to doing things. Oh, and sometimes they cluster their stuff and information in such a way that would make anyone looking at the architecture of 3rd edition say that looked really, really organized. That said, the one thing that does concern me about that company and perhaps other companies, there's probably other examples that people can think of, is you're putting out too many games. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but so the one that made me go, oh, was Warhammer The Old World role-playing, which I've heard some people like. I've heard some people don't really care. I'm not super enamored by it, but I haven't really looked into it. So I will not pass judgment on the quality of that product. However, the thing that worries me about that is, are you going to keep working on my system that I've invested all this time in? Are we going to slow down the number of books that are coming out? Because you were at a really good pace there, but I'm worried it's going to go the way of Imperium Maledictum, where there's 5 books for the whole system.
Yeah.
Maybe it didn't sell really well. I don't know. But you're competing with yourself when you do that.
And there's Wrath and Glory, there's Maledictum, there's a new Horse Heresy one coming out in the next 2 months. So it's like, whoa.
Oh, yeah. it's wild. Like, I appreciate that their output is prolific, but yeah. So we've just got Warhammer: The Old World role-playing game. Wrath and Glory exists. Imperium Maledictum exists. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition. Soulbound.
Oh, yeah.
And those are just the newer Games Workshop licenses. Never mind the fact that they also have 5e stuff. They've got the Doctor Who game.
Yep.
They've just inherited a lot of the stuff from like Fantasy Flight and stuff like. So that's not an issue. I guess they have their game that we should review, which is The Laundry.
Oh,
looks like a horror thing. I don't know. I stumbled on this the other day, which is weird because I'm like, oh, that looks interesting, but I haven't looked into it enough to be like, how is that different from like Delta Green or Call of Cthulhu?
That is so hard for a horror game to distance itself from, but you're so right.
Well, so that's another thing about editions and even new games is like, well, how do you set yourself apart without just like, you have to set yourself apart from whatever you just did, but like how much of that is necessary? Because I don't think it's not worth it if it's just a bunch of errata.
Yeah.
Right? Like if it's just fixing a bunch of errors and rule changes. Maybe after a while, that becomes something that you can work on, because there's probably going to be something. Like, I don't know a game that doesn't have that. In a lot of cases, it's like, what is the justification? At what point, like, do you need to put out like something new? Like, obviously, you want to make sure the game is relevant, of course. You might even want to have some fresh ideas on something. Obviously, in the past, there's been this idea of like, well, we can reinvent the whole game. But that doesn't always work.
Yes.
I don't know that it rarely works, but anytime the thing that holds in people's minds is that when these things come out, they fail spectacularly.
It's a risk to run them. It's approaching Kickstarter risk. But like, I don't know, like I'm game for the excitement of a new edition, because there's so much hype and so much fun that seems to come from the buildup of people getting involved in the community again, like talking about the subject and having questions about the subject. And I love that energy. But a lot of times it's for the purposes of marketing and not for anything about the game. And that's just when maybe it has something to do with a certain level of age or a certain level of experience in the hobby. But like when you've done 2 or 3 edition launches, you're like, okay, fine. There's going to be a cool new picture next week with a new model. Neato. I already have that other model on my shelf from last time. So like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It is, I think for me, what's happened to me is I've got some new edition-itis burnout. And I have found things that update either once every 10 years, like Chain of Command. I really appreciate that. Or if we want to take a look over at the other way to do new editions, is almost like software updates, like version 1.47, right? Like that's how a lot of Wargame Vault games or Nordic Weasel games update, right?
Actually, that's Wargaming has more of a tradition of that. Like the naming conventions for a lot of war games follow those things, because very often they'll just be, Panzer Blippity Blop.
Panzer Blippity Blop is like, that's my new hot war game of the year.
That's going to be the new game. It's going to be the silliest World War II game you've ever played. But like they'll literally just stick a 2, a 3, and it literally just is the edition.
Yeah.
And even when I've gone to like wargaming clubs and stuff like that, they're just saying, oh, we're just playing this. And maybe somebody will just be like, oh, what edition is that? Oh, okay, it's that one.
Yeah.
Okay. But they just call it by the name without the number.
Yeah, totally.
We're just playing this version of Kriegspiel.
Yeah, exactly.
To be fair, there's actually a lot of different editions of Kriegspiel.
That's a complicated one. That's very true.
Let's not dig into that. We should do the Kriegspiel episode, by the way.
Oh, that'd be fun. But yes, no, so my new edition stance is I'm tired of it. Let's stop doing it.
Yeah, just slow down the whole thing. Like,
let's just take it back a notch. Like, I don't want to sound like an X-Wing player when X-Wing 2nd edition came out and everyone was like, you can do that? What? And they were so mad. It's like, no, of course they can do that. They're going to do that.
Actually, I was just going to make the point to what you were saying, because I didn't make it when I brought it up, but Call of Cthulhu, they have a longer life cycle in their editions. Not like crazy. It's small iterations with longer time to see what might need adjusting or might be a cool thing to include. This is true of like RuneQuest editions are like this as well.
RuneQuest is like a complicated one.
They're not releasing a new RuneQuest like every 3 years.
It's true. It mostly gets a new edition when it changes like publisher. That's more what it has seen. Less like, oh, hey, we need to pump out a new RuneQuest. But I think that's what makes it so good.
Yeah, like it feels more out of necessity and rather than being like, oh, hey, don't forget about our game.
And like some new editions can be regressions and you can lose stuff. Some new editions you can gain cool new features. But when a new edition feels like it's just an attempt to stay relevant or to remain as part of the bottom line, it's a real off-putting thing. And that's why like a lot of the historical developers, I really appreciate their rhythm of release. And I mean, historical game developers oftentimes, like it's the rare one that is a real full-time game developer, let's be honest. A lot of them do it in addition to other jobs or pensions or whatever, right? It's just something that's maybe you could even criticize it as being part of our 24-hour information cycle. It's just people want new stuff. And so like how fast can you reasonably deliver the new before the old new is worn off? And I think that right now for a lot of wargaming companies, it's too fast. You know, the big one in the room being Games Workshop, obviously, because it's way too hard to keep an army relevant and painted. And I tried. I played in a 10th edition league with my Thousand Sons before the Thousand Sons Codex, right? With the index. And it was fun. I had a good time. But it was also a learning experience that it was not for me. And like, by the time that league was over, my army list was already not the right number of points. And it was like, well, that's annoying.
I firmly believe that Games Workshop is suffering through some kind of identity crisis right now. And they are really insecure about it. I mean, some of their legal offshoots, which is not something we cover in our show, but and there's lots of channels out there that will do that. But there's something of desperation about where they're at the moment, obviously with their core brands. And I've heard this from other people who are way more into it than you or I. And yeah, even they're kind of like, I might want to just stand back a little bit and wait till this shakes out. A lot more people I know around where I live and in the hobby are like, they'll still play whatever they're playing. They'll keep up with the game, but they're playing more Blood Bowl. They're playing more Necromunda. They're playing more stuff that's just sort of self-contained.
Yeah, like I know there has always been this like new tournament, new army, new year, new army, right? And I know that shine is wearing off because that new army means less now. It's valid for less time. It costs you more to get. The models in it are to be replaced on a sooner time frame, leaving those models invalid.
Yeah.
So it's like when you make the investment into an army, like at my side here is my World War II Canadians I'm painting right now for Chain 2. This army is valid for a very long time. And this effort in expenditure and painting and modeling is totally worth it in a way that the cycle of some other games just implies your time is not. And that's annoying. Maybe annoying is not the right word, but it's not what I want out of a game. So like some of these other games, like the Wargame Vault games, the Nordic Weasels of the world, some of the other indie developers,
those mid-level indie,
like like they let you play with your toys without changing everything. And even when they do change the rulebook, because the old edition still like it's just a PDF, you still have it. So like there's lots of really comfortable things. And I guess I do want to make that point as well, is we still have our old editions. And nowadays we have cool movements like Old Hammer, like people who still play like 5th edition fantasy and stuff, and they put it on YouTube, like, you know, Crown of Command being a really cool YouTube channel, if you want to check that out for some like retro battle reports. So there's interesting stuff out there.
I mean, the whole OSR thing is literally just comes out of people who just kept playing older editions of D&D, and then that turned into a whole movement of other games.
Exactly.
And the reintroduction of philosophies that are based on those games. And it's actually made role-playing, at least, a much more intellectual space. I think in a smaller way, war games are also with some of the indie developers. Like, I think the main intellectual debate in wargaming is the difference between narrative wargaming and competitive wargaming.
Yes, 100%.
I haven't really seen that come to a head. No one's made a definitive statement about that in game form that I know of. If anybody knows of more of that argument that exists, that would be great. I mean,
well, there was just the post by Nick, one half of Two Fat Lardies, on the Two Fat Lardy Patreon about playing the period, not the rules. And it was like his declaration of like, if you're ever at a point where what did he say? It's like, this is a paraphrase. If you're ever at a point where you're trying to put a flamethrower on a chimney to avoid a smoke column, you need to stop yourself. And it was sort of a discussion on like the role of competitive mindset in a game where you are collaboratively, you're collaboratively doing it. There's no, in a game like Chain 2 or many of the modern Lardies, there's no referee or umpire anymore. You know, it's two people who have to collectively come to a conclusion. So you can't really bash them over the head with things, because this rule set in particular, like the Lardies ones, are not made to sustain that level of competitive manipulation. Because like we've played a lot of Lardies, and you know, if you want to be like really gamey, you could try and come up with scenarios that are like potentially permitted by the textual interpretation of the rules that make no sense, right? And like, it's that type of thing. And so there was like that post by Nick that was really cool to see, but it's very local to the Lardies community, you know, their Patreon, right?
Right.
But in terms of like, who's declaring that loudly to the hilltops, I think it's more in the way that a game produces its outcomes. Like a game like Warhammer, it's all about, can you measure good? You know, like, can I measure radiuses? Like, is this guy wholly within 9 inches? Is this guy within 9 inches? Is this guy within 12 inches? And is he standing on an objective marker, which means is that guy within 3 inches? So it's like, can you do that and keep that relational construction in your head, even though there's no like colored lines on the map connecting all this stuff? Can you like visualize that? That's a skill. That's hard. But that's what the Warhammer skill is now. You know, it's not like, oh, are you doing a tactic or are you telling a story? It's more like, can you execute a pattern? And if the pattern can be executed to sufficient accuracy, you will be rewarded with X outcome.
Anytime I've ever played a game that has that focus, I feel more like a land surveyor than a gamer.
I like that, yeah.
It sucks the fun out of it for me. I'm of the mind, and again, maybe this comes from like coming from the role-playing hobby going into the wargaming hobby, but I'm of the mind that like I'm willing to take a suboptimal situation, like take the worst half of it, because it makes the rest of the fight more interesting.
I agree. Yeah.
It creates a more dramatic result, and it's like, oh man, now I gotta work for it.
Yeah, 100%.
As opposed to, oh, I have to have everything like perfectly so that I win. And I'm like, winning is the goal, but it's not the point. That's how I think of it. The point is to have fun.
100%. Like, it could be hard when you don't win. Yeah, like sometimes winning and fun.
Sometimes winning is fun.
Yes, that's a truism. But like, yes, it's not the point of the exercise for the majority of the games that motivate us to play and to paint. Like, I have a half painted Thousand Suns army, and I don't know when I'm going to finish that, because I don't know what do I need that for, other than playing some cool indie game with those models. And let's be honest, I've already painted more than enough for an indie game, right? Because I was painting for 40K scale. So
yeah, no, you've already put your back into it at this point.
I don't know. It's interesting, but at the very least, like, when I'm thinking of if I could like talk to a developer about a new edition, what I'd want to confront them with is like, are you trying to apply a correction to something you see? Are you trying to thematically reorient the game? Or are you trying to just like repaint the frame? Because let's look at Battletech. That's a game that has been like stable. That's a stable game. And you could argue that it has gone through editions. It basically has. The design variance of that game across any of its publications is so low, it's amazing.
Almost to the frustration of its current publisher. You can tell that they just feel...
They want to GW it so bad.
Yeah, I know.
To the point that they're going to make alternate settings and timelines that literally make no sense, to the point that they can release new boxes. Like, that's what they're going to do.
Battletech Gothic is so weird. And it's just like...
It's like, it could be fun, maybe, but I don't know. It doesn't appeal to me.
No, I mean, I don't object to like the concept of that.
Yeah.
But the way they did it was just so silly and so not thought out. It had grimdark veneer, which is my way of saying that it had no soul.
Yes.
It's like, look, if you're going to do that, you need to understand themes and embed those themes so that there's no dramatic tension in that setting. It's like, yeah, they're giant robots. And then there's kaiju monsters now, too, but they're just controlled by the same people who use the giant robots.
Yeah, it's just an alternative to a giant robot. We could do a kaiju drop.
So it's just fielding weirder units. Oh, I also love that they did... I think they only released Gothic-y versions of... They didn't release any kaiju units, did they?
Not yet. No, the aberrations are coming.
Are they? Are they still committed to that?
They are.
Man, I haven't been paying attention. Okay. Or they claim.
So our aberrations are coming. However, at this stage, all we have is like 8 mechs, a couple lights, a couple medium, stuff like that, and a heavier assault.
I thought they pulled a female custodes and like, oh, this is a thing. I'm not making anything that looks like that. But
I'm not actually going to support that, but I'm going to say it. No, they said the plan is they're going to do it. The criticism I've heard from people who like the Gothic concept is they're like, why didn't you give me the whole thing? I'm one of the people who wanted it, and you didn't even give it to me. You just gave me mechs that look funny. And if I want mechs that look funny, well, I sort of already have that. I'm playing Battletech.
Yeah, there's plenty of funny looking mechs.
Exactly. So like, I don't know. But that's an example of like an alt edition that's weird. But like, I don't know, my favorite recent new edition has got to be Chain 2. Yeah, it really does. I think that's just such an illustration of why you would make a new edition, is taking considered, measured changes over years of reflection, not because there was an incentive driven by like the selling of a new thing or trying to stay competitive. It was like, no, this is the time because I've learned enough to implement the changes that will make this even better. And not just to only say that's the only example of that. There are many examples in our hobby of really successful games. But that's just the one that just happened that is fresh in my mind and I'm really stoked about.
Yeah, it felt like a genuine improvement that came for genuine reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that I would say. Now, the last thing that I'm going to ask you, because we're talking about editions and all this and commitment to products. How do you feel? How does your purchase of the new edition of Dungeons and Dragons, how does that make you feel?
I only bought digital, and I'm glad that I didn't go hard copy because I feel like it's different. Like the game's been changed and the hard copy's already been left in the dust. Like they're already eradicating the hell out of it.
And it's not even certain as to where the digital version will be. I mean, yeah, the company is in turmoil.
The way I look at it is like, it's almost like when you buy a game that you don't finish, but you played halfway of, you're like, what did I get? Did I get $1 an hour out of that?
It's funny to think, the Stop Killing Games movement.
Yeah, yeah.
We almost are tasting that in Tabletop.
Right.
In the respect of this edition of, like, it hasn't happened, but the ghost of this thing where it's like, oh, it's an entirely digital live service role-playing game. I guess Wizards could just pull the plug on it.
At any point they don't want it to exist, it just stops existing.
And then where would it be, right? Like if it, as you say, like the physical rule book is essentially like an archaic edition that they've already made tweaks and fixes to, well, we could end up with the lost media problem in this area. I mean, there's already enough of a lost media problem with the restoration of tabletop games, just as, I mean, digital games are harder because obviously you need a computer that can run them.
Yes.
So anybody who takes the time to do that, I have deep respect for. Like the maintenance, and I mean, that's one of the reasons why I made, and asked you to be part of this podcast.
Yeah.
Was because there's so many games that like, oh, can't wait for the new thing. I'm like, man, do you know how many games exist? You don't even have to wait for the new thing. You can find a new thing you've never heard of that's like 30 years old.
Yeah.
And I bet it would be weird to play, but it's totally playable.
It'll have bad vehicle rules, but otherwise rock.
Yeah, exactly. It might require hexagons and little cardboard counters, but once you get into it, it's way more interesting than you think.
Agreed.
So anyway, that'll do it for now. Thank you all for listening. And what do we? Oh, well, I announced earlier in the thing. So Classic Traveler, and it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. And yeah, I don't know if there's anything else, but until next time, happy gaming.
Happy gaming.
We hope you enjoyed delving into today's episode. A big thanks to all of you out there for joining us. If you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Instagram and YouTube at Tales and Tactics Podcast, or on all popular podcast platforms. Join us again on the next exciting episode of Tales and Tactics.